Hello and welcome to Kick Unhealthy Relationships to the Curb. I am your host, Stephanie McPhail. I specialize in toxic relationship recovery. Now, I'm going to say this up front. My man, Steve, who is my co-host, is again not able to make it tonight. The good reason is that he's actually doing some really great stuff for the show and for Chapters Wrap Network. So we can have some little photos of him to remind everybody, Steve, because he hasn't been on a little while. So I'm just going to give him a little bit of flack. But I am going to be solo tonight. I have a really great guest on tonight. Sam is going to be talking to us. Sam's actually really cool because he actually did a TEDx talk. So if anybody is watching this and you've ever thought about doing a TEDx talk, you're going to definitely want to tune in to this show tonight. And he's got so much great stories, so many great things that when I talked to him, couldn't wait to get him on. Sam Mansour is a CPA and owner of Stouffer and Associates, PLLC, a public accounting firm located in Liberty Lake, Washington. Sam is a very driven father, husband, business owner, TEDx speaker, entrepreneur, and Ironman who specializes in working with medium to large businesses. His primary focus when working with businesses throughout the country is in strengthening and improving the owner's take-home or business net income. Sam's depth and knowledge combined with his passion for business transformation creates powerful opportunities for his clients. Sam is an active mentor, coach, advisor, and speaker. Sam's mission in assisting businesses with implementation and execution of strategies is supported by his team of 50 plus accountants. So welcome to the show, Sam. Like I said, when I started talking to you, I couldn't wait to have you on the show because you have such a diverse background. You have such a great experience. So welcome, welcome, welcome.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for having me. I'm super excited. And when you presented the opportunity, I thought, this would be a great platform for what I love to do and what my TEDx talk highlighted.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about, I'd love for you to share with the audience your backstory. I think when you started sharing your experiences, I just thought that it was such a very specific, very different type of upbringing than maybe a lot of other people have experienced. And maybe how that upbringing, how your childhood kind of brought you into this world of being a mentor and creating businesses and all of that.
Yeah. So very different background for sure. My name is actually Osama Mansour. So my dad's from Syria. He came over here. And I mean, basically, it's one of those stories where, his family saved up all their money. My grandfather owned a laundromat, came over here, met my mom, and they went to college together and ultimately got married, then moved over to Seattle. I was born. And about 6 years later, my dad was like, hey, I think it'd be cool to move to Saudi Arabia. And so Saudi Arabia is a very different country from a place like Syria, where Syria is pretty close to the European countries, and so it's a very different environment. And when we were shocked. It was a very different culture, and for me, being a very I'm a very Caucasian person, and so it was hard to integrate into that culture. And so that was kind of my first, real exposure to a very, very different environment. And my father also insisted that we go into the Saudi school system, which, I couldn't speak a word of Arabic. And ultimately, I graduated high school there speaking Arabic fluently. So it was definitely, I always tell people it was a very hard journey, very, very hard journey. But at the same time, I wouldn't trade it for anything because I feel like it's made me into the person that I am today. So those hardships really have helped shape me in a positive way.
That's amazing. Do you still have family in Syria? Like with the earthquake and stuff going on, is there anyone that that's experienced the earthquake?
Yeah, I mean, there have been people that have been reaching out to me, just talking and needing support and things like that. So yeah, I mean, a lot of, well, actually, I think all of my dad's family, now that I think about it, are in Syria, and then my mom's family, they're here in Spokane, Washington.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, I think that one of the things, so first of all, I'm glad to hear everybody's okay. That's really important. But I think that hard work, I mean, my grandfather actually was born in France, but his father sent him to Holland speaking no Dutch at all. And he ended up like graduating top of his class or whatever is the story. I wasn't around for it, but he always talked about how he had to learn hard things in a language he didn't speak. And then, so all of that go. How did you navigate that? Because I was always interested. My grandfather, like, how did you navigate your how to navigate that when you were figuring it out?
And I mean, it kind of was like being it's almost like I was a blind person and they were trying to, explain things to me because it was just in a completely different language. And this was about 30 years ago. And the country has changed quite a bit. So I mean, it was a challenge, but I mean, it was interesting because I felt like I developed skills from that experience. And there's this thing called a TCK, or a third culture kid, and it's where a child is basically raised in another culture that's not their own, and there's a lot of traits that come out of that. And I think as you're learning how to, I mean, like the language itself is like it looks like scribbles. So there's nothing to
Yeah.
compare to the English language. There's really
Yeah.
no point of reference. I mean, you're starting from scratch.
Hmm.
And so it was very challenging. A lot of just, I mean, it kinda got beat into you a little bit, if you will. It sounds
Hmm.
very negative, but, it was not easy, especially at that young of an age. Because right, I wasn't super young, but I mean, I could speak. My kids right now, I have twin boys, they're 6 and a half, and, they can understand, they can speak. I mean, and trying to learn a completely different language and culture. I mean, I remember, just images of when we first showed up, and that was now 30 some years ago.
So it sounds like it's something that really shaped you though into who you are.
Yeah, and you know, I always tell people, if we were like computer programs, right? You'd code the software, click run, and there'd still be problems. And so we're human beings, and we are very much shaped by, positive and negative things. And so, those, and I even hesitate to call them negative experiences because they're experiences that I needed to have to become the person that I am today. And so, I hear a lot about where, people are saying, "Oh, try to find the good in those experiences." And when you're in those really tough situations, you're like, "What good is there?"
Mhm.
But when you get past them, and you usually do, right? Then you look back on them and you think, "Wow, like I learned some tremendous lessons from that experience, and those are lessons that I can take with me for the rest of my life." So I just think it's life. It's living life. Some things are not as pleasant as we want them to be, but honestly, without those experiences, good or bad, it's hard for us to become the amazing people that we are today.
100%. And so now did all of that like culmination together make you interested in becoming an entrepreneur? Like, did you come out of that experience? You graduated high school and you right away were like, I'm going to be a business person, or like how did that work?
Yeah, so I mean, I've always just been really passionate about it. I've always thought that'd be so cool. I've always loved the idea of strategy and innovation and, paving my own path. And I always thought that running a business or being a business operator would be the perfect way to do that. After you get past school, then it's like, okay, now what? And that just seemed like a really awesome experience. And so I always kind of had the itch to do it. And throughout college, I was always brainstorming, this idea or that idea. And then when I started into my career, I was fortunate enough to be presented with the opportunity to buy into the firm that I'm at now at a fairly young age. And so it almost, what is that? Luck is preparation meeting opportunity. And so there was that opportunity, and mentally, in a lot of other ways, I was preparing for it. And when the opportunity came, it kind of fell into my lap a little bit.
I mean, how old were you when you were given that opportunity? I mean, that feels kind of unheard of to be kind of wet behind the ears new, and someone up there was like, okay, Sam needs to buy into this.
Yeah, I mean, I was in my late 20s, and typically especially in public accounting, it takes about 10 to 15 years. So I was about 5 or 6 years in. It takes 10 to 15 years for people to, to become partners and own a firm. I was just, the part that really, aside from being a CPA and having some of that technical knowledge, the part that really kind of helped accelerate my career was my ability to sell. I love selling. I love talking to people, and I don't see it as selling. I really see it as more coaching, because I think if you're providing something positive and something that they can use and something that they need, then it's just really connecting the dots for them. And so I've always really enjoyed that. And that I think is what really kind of that skill set put me at the right place at the right time.
That's awesome. So then from there, after you bought in to the company and you were a partner, correct? What happened from there?
Yes, I mean, we have so since then tripled in size, and we've yeah, we've increased our staffing significantly with that. So it's been a roller coaster of a journey for sure. I've learned a lot, you know. Uh, I think honestly, at whatever age and level of experience, it's really hard to get into running a business, and you learn a lot of things. You learn. I mean, I had someone just send me a text before this show, and she said, "Hey, I had this group and an opening has come available. I know you are very familiar with crucial conversations. Could you come and talk on that?" And I'm like, I'm an accountant, but I am fairly familiar with that because it's a skill that I had to develop over time. So
Mhm.
I've built a lot of just really great skills over the course of building up the firm. It's been an exciting journey, but it's also been a very it's been a very stressful and tiring journey. It's hard. It's entrepreneurship is not easy, but it is also very rewarding for sure.
Well, that's what I think. I mean, I was a teacher for 18 years and I felt a calling. I had like kind of similar, like I always felt like I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I just didn't know what it was. I had to figure out what it was. And part of me wanted to be a public speaker or inspirational speaker. I remember seeing Wayne Dyer and I was like, I want to do what he does. He seems like a really cool guy. And then, my family members were like, well, then you should be a teacher because that's inspiring. And I was like, okay. But I kept wondering, like, what is it? What's that thing that I really want to do? And the weird thing is you ask for things and sometimes you get it, but not in the way you necessarily think you're going to. And so, I finally realized like I had no choice but to write a book and become a speaker and do all that kind of stuff because of my experience in toxic relationships. So I wouldn't have chosen that path, that way to do it. There's my book, Being Love Shouldn't Hurt, available on Amazon. But I would not have ever chosen that. But I did. And I mean, that's what happened to me, and that's what I used that in order to get to this place where I knew I needed to be. But I find it, if you don't, I mean, and I'll speak for myself. I think that if I hadn't done healing and worked on my own self esteem and all that, I think being an entrepreneur would have been way more difficult because of how it can be. Like I didn't have a background in marketing. I didn't have a background in sales. Like that for me was the hard stuff. Like I wanted to help people, but then I didn't have any of the business savvy or anything like that. And so there definitely was like this weird roller coaster type of ride to get to where I am now. And then there's still so much to learn. And I think there's days definitely that are much easier than others. So like how do you deal with that kind of up and down and sometimes those really stressful days?
Yeah, and I mean, and I do a lot of business coaching too. I mean, because I've learned a lot, and I mean, I think the number one thing is you have to predict it. You not knowing where those highs and lows are going to be, but you need to predict the fact that you're going to go through highs and lows. Like I think it's impossible or close to impossible to not experience that. So one of the biggest mistakes that I see a lot of people make is they're shocked when it happens to them, when that dip happens, and they're just so shocked. And so, I always try to say, I'm like, here's the thing. We know it's not just going to all be this upward trajectory. It's not going to be that way. And they say, yeah, I get it. And so then my thing is when you're in the forest and you can't, like when you're hunting, when you're going through there, you're trying to navigate. Remember that you're going to land in that position, right? You're going to be confused. You're going to be lost. You're going to be scared. You're going to feel a lot of these things because that's just kind of part of the journey. And
Mhm.
so what you have to be able to do is not basically it's not freak out, right? You can't be so shocked by it, right? So to the point that you don't take action. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle is that they are so shocked by what they're experiencing that they just stop and they give up.
Yeah.
And sometimes success is like right around that corner, right? But you just cut it off right before then, right? Oh, I just can't do it. I just can't. And that does come back to a lot of that self-care. And so if you're not taking care of your physical health, your mental health, your spiritual health, if you're not taking care of these things and then the storm comes, because it will come,
Mhm.
then how are you going to be strong enough to make your way through it?
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, that's even whether, I coach professional women, and it's interesting because whether they're entrepreneurs or nurses or doctors or whatever, we do have to prepare. So, one of the things that I always tell clients is that you have to make sure that you are having that self-care as a priority. So just like you said, I want to make sure you're getting enough sleep. Are I see you drinking your water. I have my green smoothie and my water right here, constantly getting in my liquids and making sure that has to be a priority. It's not selfish, because you're not going to be able to show up to anybody fully if you are not taking care of yourself. I think a lot of people, they feel like, oh, well, I don't have time to go to the gym, or I don't have time to, make myself a healthy meal or whatever. But that's really a huge detriment. I mean, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, what I have found, and this kind of parallels another talk that I give, especially like when I go to college, is I say, look, we rarely ever have a problem with a person coming in based on their technical ability. It's the soft skills, communication. I'm like, you might be a brilliant person, but if you can't respond to an email, like, what good is that knowledge? So
Hmm.
I think there are these soft skills that we tend to just really like undermine, and we just think, oh, whatever. And like what you brought up, water, that's a huge thing. So for example, I know when I start to kind of get a headache and I feel tired, I immediately know it's water. I used to take a lot of like Tylenol or ibuprofen. And now that I got into the Ironman world of things, I know it's water. And so then
Hmm.
if you go around and talk to people like, hey, are you drinking enough water? The answer is, oh, I know I need to, but I just don't. Right. And then so many other things come from just that simple thing, which is water. Right. It's such a simple thing, like the idea, like the soft skills, right? Such a basic thing that we go right into the core and the hardcore, those technical things that we think we need to master. But if we don't take care of our sleep, if we don't take care of drinking enough water, I mean, you are literally undermining your ability to do anything else. The example I always give people is, think of it like a boat, right? And so you're a boat, and so you're trying to move forward. If if you have tons of little holes in that boat, right? A little hole because you're not drinking enough water, a little hole because you're not eating the right food, a little hole because you're not working out, a little hole because you're not sleeping. What happens then is your boat fills with water, right? And then when you try to move that boat forward, it is so cumbersome. It takes so much energy and effort to make progress in life because you're filling your boat is being filled up with water everywhere. What we like to do is say, oh, there's this massive gushing hole. Let's fill it. Right. And yes, there are some of those things in life, like a really toxic relationship. But at the same time, there are all these other little micro things that are just bleeding into our life that make that boat so heavy. So if we want to do something, like let's say we want to switch from being an employee in a business to an entrepreneur owning our own thing. But if we have accumulated so much debt and so many toxic relationships and just all this negativity, it's so hard then to move from that employee situation to becoming the employer
Hmm.
because your boat is so filled up with this
Hmm.
very toxic and negative information. Or if you want to, just again, to kind of the point of your show, if you want to leave a toxic relationship, but you can't because you are so reliant on the other person to fill some of these gaps in your life, and your boat is just so filled with toxic elements that you bring in yourself or other people bring in, then it's almost impossible to make progress forward. And so I think it's really important to take care of that boat, which is yourself, and
Hmm.
make sure that you're really caring for it. And like simple one, like you said, if you're not drinking enough water, I mean, I don't know. It's a huge lesson I've learned in the last 2 years, and I'm in my mid-30s. It's like it took me this long to figure out. Oh my gosh, if I'm not drinking enough water, everything goes off the rails.
I have women in their 50s and 60s where we're learning. I call them my prunes. I'm like, you're my little prunes. Like, come on, hydrate, hydrate. It's funny because that's one of the things, and that I want to bring this into talking about Iron Man. But you know, some of the biggest breakthroughs start when I get clients to start drinking at least 96 ounces of water. Once I can get them to finally buy in to making themselves a priority, And sometimes it literally just starts with getting that water. That thing, they're like, I can't drink that much water. It's not possible for me. And I say, but you can. We'll get you there. And they finally break through and they get to that number I'm trying to get them to. All of a sudden they're like, oh, and then they start being able to do all of these other things. And so I love all the things you said. I think it's so true. We've got to make sure that we're doing that. And that kind of brings us into the Ironman. So you were not always someone that was the guy doing Ironman. Like, you were not the one who was always doing, or were you? Were you always someone who did self-care, but you kind of put that to the side for a bit? Or how did all that culmination where you're like, I'm going to actually go do an Ironman, which I think is just so cool.
Yeah. Man, I was, and actually, so before we jump into that, to the point of the water thing, that's like, to me, it's like, that's like ground zero. And so all the other mental health stuff, like if you're not even taking care of that part, there's so many other mental health things that you're probably not paying attention to. And then on the Ironman part, so no, I wasn't. And if you guys watch the TEDx talk, it's daily deposits. You go to the TED site itself or YouTube, but I essentially I literally went from a couch potato, and over the course of like a year and a half, I completed 4 half Ironmans and 2 full Ironmans. Basically what happened was I had a friend of mine, very successful in business, and he came to me and he's like, so you're an entrepreneur, you're doing all these things, but you are not taking care of yourself. He's like, this doesn't make any sense. And, a lot of times people tell me that, I'm like, okay, I get it. I know I'll fix it someday. And for a decade, I couldn't figure it out. And so he kind of shamed me into it. And honestly, it was one of those things where I was like, I'm going to prove you wrong. And I'm going to the intention was never to do an Ironman, but it was to just go and run, like just do a half marathon. And then it escalated. And the way that it escalated was I kind of learned a pattern. And so what I found, and then you might have kind of some more expertise in this area than I would, this is what I experienced, was that anytime I tried to make a quick change, right? It was a spike, like a diet or some aggressive workout plan. It never stuck with me. But then what I had learned was, okay, if I make these daily deposits, so all I have to do is just try to just do a little thing every day, right? Just a tiny thing, go out and walk. And then of course, if I just committed myself to walking half an hour, well, after a month of that, I'm like, I guess I could jog. And after a month of that, I guess I could run. And so it literally went from like a 10K to doing these Ironman events because I was able to sustain that every day. And so it's like the idea of that compounding effect, right? You just keep you do it and you add and you add and you add and you keep up that momentum, and eventually you are shocked with the results. And that kind of comes back to something we talked about a little bit earlier, but you can't expect for things to change super quickly, right? So if you think business is going to be easy, you're wrong, right? If you think that your health is going to change overnight, you're wrong. If you think you're going to go on a quick diet plan and your health is going to change, most likely you're going to rebound. So you're wrong, right? So you have to adjust your expectations, and that's kind of what I did. I said, I'm not doing this to become health. I don't expect to get a nice set of abs in the next year or two. Like, I'm resigned to that. So I kept asking myself every time I did something, the question in my head was, can I do this for the rest of my life? When I answered yes to that daily routine, it created a foundation to where I could then throw in an Ironman, right? Because I had that foundation. But the problem in the past with any of the things I had done, I'd never learned that foundation. I would get off the ground and fall back down, get off the ground and fall back down. And so that cycle is just so rough. No progress was ever made. I wasted a lot of time and a lot of money. So until I learned how to kind of get to a point where I could make those daily deposits, and then I could escalate them over time. But I told myself when my body was ready, when it wanted to run, it would run. And if when it didn't, then it just didn't.
How did you get out of your own head? Because I think sometimes that's where they might say they want to do something, but then they talk themselves out of it.
Yeah, that's tough. And I help a lot of people with this now. And again, I think this is your area of expertise. Probably you need a coach. I mean, I just think that as human beings, we hear something, we get excited about it, we go back and lay in bed, and then our negativity, those toxic thoughts, just like a wave, they just come and just consume you. And so I had a coach. I mean, And anytime I talk to people now, I'm like, if you can't figure something out, get a coach. It is
Mhm.
worth the investment. And this is not like a plug or pitch for you, but it's just like anymore. I thought, how much of my life am I going to spend trying to figure something out that I'm just not, like, a year after year, I'm just not getting right. So
Mhm.
getting a coach, like finding someone like you probably and other people that can help. I mean, it's so critical to getting out of your head. And I mean, you might have some thoughts there, but I mean that's I'm not an expert in that area, and I found the best way to do this is just to find an expert.
Mhm. Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, I for a long time tried to figure out how to heal from toxic relationships. I had degrees in psychology. I was a crisis counselor. Like, I had all the information in there, but I needed someone on the outside to be like, "Don't do that, don't do that thing," or to be
Yeah,
accountable. I mean, that's another thing too, and especially
yeah.
with training and stuff like that. I mean, all of it. We need. I always kind of joke around. Having a coach is kind of like having that parent that keeps reminding you what you're focusing on, but then they have all the good answers too, which is really helpful, and they really just want you to be like, what I love, and I know you as a mentor as well. I love seeing clients succeed. I love seeing those aha moments and watching that actual transformation.
Yeah, a lot of people care about you, and I think you have to be honestly, I think, be brave enough to go to
Mhm.
someone and say, "I need help."
Mhm. 100%. Well, I see where that like went by really, really fast, but I see we're close on time. So, really quick, if anybody wanted to get to know more about you, what would you recommend them doing?
I mean, they can reach out, and I don't know if you have a way to give 'em my contact information. I just love talking to people, helping people, and I'm, just very open to just, you can email me, look me up. I love to chat. So,
Awesome, awesome. So, yeah, definitely, if you have not already, definitely, you could look up Sam on Facebook. It sounds like that's how you and I connected. If you want to check out his TED Talk and get inspired, definitely check that out. But thank you always for all of our viewers and listeners for coming on and hanging out with us during this time. It was great having you on, Sam. We'll definitely have to have you on again. And for those of you who tune in, we will be seeing you next week for another amazing guest. Have a great night, everyone, and see you next week. Bye.
thank you.